Good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and call the special meeting of the Board of Finance to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, that's better than we've done in the past, so good job, guys. Couple quick housekeeping. First of all, thank you to Simsbury Community Media, formerly SCTV, for filming as always. And remind folks, if you can, to mute unless you're speaking. And sometimes I don't see everyone on the screen at the time, so just pause before you speak so that we can make sure we get everyone in. A couple of quick housekeeping items. I sat in on a demonstration of a ClearGov budget presentation arranged by the first select woman. Also in attendance were the town manager, the assistant town manager, and Amy to evaluate changing the budget books to a more readable and iterative format online. ClearGov builds their budget books with GFOA award designation in mind and incorporates the GFOA best practices. So in particular, this board will be happy to hear that for capital, their program includes the GFOA best practices of ranking capital, detailing operating costs of capital projects, projecting start and completion dates for capital projects. Staff is still in the process of evaluating the program, so more to come possibly this summer or in the next budget cycle. But if you want to get an advanced preview of sort of what it looks like, you can take a look at Tallinn, Woodbridge, or South Windsor's budget books. And to that end, I'll ask members to begin thinking about the budget process and ways we can improve for next year, and we'll put that on a future agenda item. So the first order of business is setting the mill rate. As this board knows, but the public may not, the state ultimately passed a budget with a motor vehicle cap at 32.46 mils versus the 29 that we budgeted on based on the governor's budget. Most Board of Finances across the state use the governor's budget to do their budgets because the state very rarely, and in fact, this is the first time in the 13 years I've been in government, gives less than what the governor did. But unfortunately, this year we got less than the governor's budget. So it's to a deficit of $143,569 in reimbursements for the new mill rate. While a large number to you and I, it is actually not considered material in a $100 billion budget. The state legislation requires towns to proportion the motor vehicle mill rate reimbursement with separate fire districts. Amy and Maria have a recommendation for the board's consideration of the proportional amounts for the town and the fire district. And this recommendation comes to us after consulting with state OPM, GFOA members, and the fire district. Tonight, our board needs to decide whether to increase the mill rate to reflect the decreased revenue from the state or to keep the mill rate as is and taxes flat, as we articulated as a primary goal and as did the Board of Selectmen. We also need to approve the apportionment recommendation. A few points to consider. When we set the mill rate tax collection assumption rate is at 98.5%. And part of the reason we do that is to accommodate variable revenues from the state, of which this is one. As a reminder, we budgeted a contribution to capital reserves, which could be tapped in the next budget to replace the lost revenues if needed. If you'll remember, the capital reserves contribution is not for specific items, but it's just a general contribution, which could be pulled back if needed. To put this in a little perspective, had we set the mill rate on the day of referendum, we would be absorbing the loss as a matter of course, and that's typically what we do. The boards of finance, selectmen, and education all stated publicly the importance of keeping the mill rate flat, both in substance and in principle. At the same time, our budget mailer, and we also state publicly that the mill rate as presented is anticipated and subject to the Board of Finance setting the final mill rate after a referendum. And this is because sometimes we do get new revenue estimates, and our job is to set a mill rate sufficient to pay for expenditures. In either scenario, I do want the public to know that in keeping the mill rate flat or raising the real estate mill rate to reflect the decreased state reimbursement, the median taxpayer in Simsbury, either way, is going to see a net tax savings based on the median taxpayer with 2 vehicles. Personally, I think I've had a chance to speak with some of you on this, and certainly with Amy. I've gone back and forth on this, but in hearing from folks about their current concerns in town and the inflation that people are facing both personally and as businesses, I think there is some symbolic value in keeping taxes flat. And based on the quarterly report tonight, we have sufficient reserves. And I also just want to thank Amy, who I asked her, and she was able to confirm with our auditor that we can keep the mill rate flat as presented without any adverse impact on our financial status. So I'm open to discussion, and I'm open to changing my mind on that. But I wanted to start with Amy before we go to questions on sort of the glitch we have with, not really a glitch, but the challenge we have with fire district, what you mean by proportioning the mill rate, how you came up with what you did, and why this is the recommendation. So if you could walk us through that, and then the assumptions you made and the total savings.
Yep, sure. So like you indicated, once the state budget was finalized, it went from a proposed 29 mills to 32.46 mills. And as the legislation came out and we received notification of what that meant for us, we had contacted the state, and they let us know that including fire districts, we could not exceed that cap of 32.46 mills. So therefore, we cannot take the full 32.46 mills for the vehicle taxes, as the fire district gets a portion of that as well. We reached out to the state and asked them if they had either a recommended or a required way as to how we divvy up the mill rate between the fire district and the town. And they came back and said that they did not, as long as we did not exceed the cap of the 32.46 mills. So I reached out to some of my Connecticut GFOA board members and proposed it to them with the idea of doing the proportionate mill rate as the fairest, and received concurrence from them. And that's what they'll be doing for the towns that share a fire district as well. So basically all I did was take our current mill rate at the 37.41, and then I took theirs at the 1.22 to get 38.63, I believe. 100%, I divvied it out between the percentage allocation between each. And then I took that 32.46 cap and allocated it out between the percentages that we came up with to get the proportionate share. So that comes out to the 31.49 mills for the town, and then 0.97 mills for the fire district.
Amy, before you go on, how much is the fire district going to be short in reimbursable revenues?
They are short. I have that 1 second. They would be short about almost $70,000.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Just overall, if we're keeping the mill rate flat, obviously the real estate mill rate, we keep it flat, there's no increase. On the motor vehicle mill rate, if we do the 32.46 as opposed to the 37.41, there's about a $60 savings per vehicle. So if there's 2 vehicles, generally per household, it's about $120 in savings. If we adjust the mill rate to collect the additional $143,000 deficit, we would have to increase our real estate mill rate to that 37.47, which would be an additional $13 a year for the taxpayers. And the motor vehicle mill rate at the 32.46, like I said, that's a savings of $60. So that would be still a net savings to the taxpayer of about $47 a year.
Thank you. And thank you for reaching. So just to recap, what you're doing is similar to what every GFOA member is doing in the state of Connecticut who has a fire district.
Correct.
And you've consulted with the fire district and they're in concurrence with the recommendation. Okay, I'll open it up to board members. Derek and Mike, I can't see you. So if either of you wants to speak.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I'm in support. I think optically this year, probably more than ever, it's really important that we keep the mill rate flat. So I'm in support of keeping the mill rate flat. Thank you.
Okay,
I agree.
Linda?
So do I.
We got Linda.
I agree.
Okay. Any other comments before I ask for a motion?
I am in agreement as well. This is my first year on the board. We started this process with the admonition to the other boards that we wanted to keep the mill rate at least flat. At the end of the day, the flat mill rate represented a less generous alternative than reducing the rate because of the increased income we had from the automobile taxes and ARPA funds. So I think it would be a bad time to raise the mill rate. I understand that this is a problem we didn't create, but I still think that we're making the right decision here.
And I'll just point out, the Board of Finance is finding $13 significant, and that's something to keep in mind in the next budget cycle. All right. So with that, would someone like to make a motion effective May 26, 2022 to set a mill rate for fiscal year 2022-2023 at 37.41 mils for real estate and personal property and 31.49 mils for motor vehicles based on the town's proportional share as outlined by the Director of Finance?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, guys. Now we move on to the quarterly reports. I just want to remind folks this has been a work in progress, and Amy and I always say it's a progress, not perfection, but I think we made a lot of progress on this, and I do want to thank Amy for her efforts. You'll notice the addition of fiscal notes, which I in particular found incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
And I think will make for a smoother meeting and understanding. One of the things I've asked for in future ones is the balance and reserve for special revenue funds to be added to those sheets going forward, and that shouldn't be a problem, but that was the only sort of significant thing. But as we go through it, I'll ask, we'll go through sort of section by section and ask for comments as we go through each section. One thing that is of note to the public is we're projecting a fund balance of 17.57%. Our end of year policy when we do transfers says that if we exceed 17%, then we move money around. And during the budget process, we can budget, but our policy is to budget between 15 and 17%. So we're just a little over reserves, which is a good thing to be right now, given the uncertainties of Latimer and the experience study we're waiting on. But Amy, why don't you start walking us through section by section? And if you don't mind, to the extent we're using numbers, I think most people are still using the numbers from the previous packet. So if you refer to a page number, the previous packet, please.
All right, let me pull that up then so I have it in front of me.
I actually have the new packet in front of me, so
We might need both then.
I guess we need both.
Both, we're all good.
Okay.
All right, let me just share my screen. Okay. Everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so since we added some of the fiscal notes, and I kind of go through, some of the major changes quarter over quarter, you're kind of used to hearing the same things over and over again. So I think with some of the fiscal notes, it kind of refreshes your memory on what was said last time. So I'm gonna skip over that and kind of go based on areas of interest in my discussions with Lisa. Like she said, we worked together on this on, what are the highlights that you all are interested in, and what you all are interested in seeing. And obviously in particular, it's the year-end projections and where we're going to end up. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom here. So on the revenue side of the general fund, looking at about $1.1 million in excess revenues. And if you were to compare this to my projections as of the end of December, you'll see that it's a little bit lower. So at the end of December, my projections were about 1.6 million. So I'll just take you through a couple of the areas that changed from last quarter to this quarter that make up the majority of that variance. The first line item under the tax department, we're seeing favorable budgetary estimates of about 414,000. Sorry, my eyes itchy. And I believe at the last quarter was about $700,000 or so. So typically around $414,000 is where we typically see our excess revenue in the tax collections come in, $400,000 or $500,000 around that area. If you look at the same period last year, we were about 100.15% in excess, and this year about 100.43. So we're right in that same ballpark. So the difference between December projections and now is that my December projections had about $300,000 of prior year tax collection revenue, and these projections do not. So after we had the $300,000 in prior year tax collection revenue, the tax collectors then issued about $300,000 of refunds, and then they basically offset themselves. So that number came back down to $400,000 and in line with prior years. The other area I wanted to mention is the town manager's office. The projections here decreased to about $58,000. It was an estimated $179,000 in the last projections. And this is due to the municipal revenue sharing grant of $174,000. This is not something that we budgeted for during fiscal year 22, but when the state came out with their budget, it was something that we were supposed to receive. About a month or so ago, the state came out and said, hey, by the way, you might not be getting this money. So to be conservative, and we have not heard anything of different since, I actually removed that grant money from the projections. So those are the majority of the changes on the revenue side. Did anybody else have any other questions on any line items or any of the fiscal notes? Okay. And moving on to expenditures. On the expenditure side, this one looks a little bit different as well. So projected through year end, about $178,000 in savings. The last quarter was about $600,000. This was done as of the end of December, which was prior to the budget process and us evaluating the Board of Education and where they planned on landing. So if you look up here at the Board of Education line item, you'll see an anticipated loss of about $575,000 in line with what was presented during the budget process. So if you were to add that back to the anticipated $178,000, you get about $753,000 in savings on the town side, which, as you can tell from the fiscal notes as we go through it, it is largely due to staff turnover. It's been a combination of actual staff turnover, positions that either are not filled in a timely manner, we're either having trouble finding people, vacancies, things of that nature. And then we are also seeing some staff shortages. So for example, in this highway line item, it's been super hard to find seasonal help. So they have not been able to utilize their budget because they just haven't been able to find the help that they need. The 575, I will take you through when I go through the Board of Education financial statement. But is there anything else on the town side on the expenditures that you all had questions on?
Amy, I know you're going to address this during the education thing, but I did have an opportunity to speak with the superintendent of schools, and they have taken some steps, which Amy will walk us through, to reduce that number to the best they can. But they are anticipating requesting using the Education Non-Lapsing Fund to fill some of this gap, and they are anticipating additional revenue from Project Choice to refill that. But Amy will walk us through that once we get to education. So there may be more in savings that shows on this page through the use of the non-lapsing fund when we actually get to year end. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So moving on to the Simsbury Farms Fund. Some good news to report here, although not as good as what the screen shows, and I'll explain that in a minute. So projected through the end of the year is about $594,000 in net income. So as Lisa and I were talking about it earlier today, I reached out to Tom Tversky, and you can see the majority of the revenue is coming in via the special programs. It's coming in from the day camps, it's coming in from the pools, and then it's coming in from the golf course. So a oversight on my part, I didn't realize that they started collecting the special program and the day camp revenue this far in advance. They actually started collecting it in February. So there is some summer money that is included in these numbers that at the end of the year, we are going to have to remove from these financials because you need to match your revenues with your expenditures. So if the camp is happening in July or August, the revenue needs to go into July or August, even though it was collected in February or March of this year. So he gave me some projections for the amount that needs to come out. And for fiscal year 23 revenue, it's about $142,000. And then he thinks that we're going to have camp expenditures for the last 2 weeks in June of about another $100,000. So this net income for the end of the year, still significant. It's probably going to be around $350,000, but not quite as good as I made it out to be at the $594,000.
And Amy, the net revenue adds to fund balance. So we're looking at a net fund balance of
600. Actually, I have it. Hold on. 180. So the fund balance will probably be about $550,000.
Yeah, and so one of the things we as a board monitor is reserve level, and so that puts us, at about 25%, 27% reserves there. And GFOA recommendation is between 12 and 16 and a half, 2 months. So this is great news. Congratulations to Tom. That will help us weather some bad weather in future years. So great job there. But as we look to, general fund contributions in future years, that will be something, this will be a tool we have with which we evaluate. So congratulations to Tom and Amy in getting this fund well situated.
Moving on to the health insurance fund. Again, all the way at the bottom, the projected for year end anticipated to come in pretty much around flat. You'll see that there's a couple of notes up here, which I'll go through. So we had budgeted about $15,600,000 in premiums to be expected for fiscal year 22. Right now, I'm projecting a little over 15 million. So there was a couple of items that led to this. First of all, the smaller of the two, there was a budget error of about $200,000 on my part, where I should have anticipated that money going into the MetLife Dental Fund and not the Cigna Fund. But the majority of this, well over $400,000, we have seen as we hire new individuals that there has been a significant shift in the number of individuals that have left the family plan and joined the single plan, just based on people's circumstances when they're hired. And we have had a number of individuals that have moved from our more expensive HMO, PPO plans into our high deductible plan to take advantage of that savings. So even coming in flat at the end of the year, our Our reserves are still expected to be around 5.3 million, or 36% of expected claims. And that's pretty much right in line with where we had intended during the budget process that we would be. So really no change in the long-term planning of this fund.
So, thanks for that, Amy. And just going forward, one of the changes, as we mentioned at the beginning, will show the fund reserve in percent in future quarterlies. Okay.
So those are the highlights that I have for the major funds. Is there any other funds that somebody had a question on that you wanted me to take you through?
Amy, what is the fund balance in TARP?
Is 415,000 as of the end of June. It will be.
And when do we anticipate get the first tranche of the state money that comes in usually?
It's different for every grant. I can get that to you, but I don't know offhand when we typically get our TAR money.
Okay. And we're going to go through the capital projects and education.
Yes.
Okay.
So are we going to go through the special revenue funds where we have questions? Is that what you were saying, Amy? If
yes.
We have questions? Okay.
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions. These are really minor questions. Page 39, gives the revenue fund descriptions, and there's one called Police Community Services. Is that the same as what's on page 43, which doesn't say police, but just says community services?
Yes, it is.
Okay. That was an easy one. And let's see. The triathlon. I seem to remember last time, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but because I've been advocating for a while closing this fund, and I think it had like $20,000 in it, and now it's got next to nothing. So I'm just wondering, where did that money go?
So it probably does still have $20,000 in it, but all you're looking at on the triathlon is the expenditures for 21 and the expenditures for 22. The fund balance isn't on there. That's what Lisa's having me at for the next time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're right. But wait a minute. I don't have that. Do you know what page that one is on, the triathlon?
In the new packet, it's on page 30.
So the revenues is only new revenues in that year. I see.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So
then let me just reiterate again. I mean, it doesn't look like the triathlons, it hasn't happened for a couple of years. There's nobody organizing it this year. You got 20,000 in it, as I remember. Let's close that out and put that money in Tom's special revenue fund or somewhere appropriate like that. I mean, that's the one that makes sense to me.
I do have a note to put that as part of our year-end close. Did you want to do it sooner?
I don't care. I just don't. I mean,
Okay.
I don't see the need to keep this fund going forever. Yeah.
Okay.
And this same with the 350th, which is on page 58. So there's a fund showing overall positive balance of 34,859. I mean, obviously they did a good job raising money, and then COVID prevented them from spending it all. What's the plan for where that money's going to go?
So I haven't heard anything official, but I do know that they want to donate some of the remaining funds. I can follow up to see where that is in the process.
Donate it to what?
The town. I'm not sure in what capacity though, but I can follow up. Like I said, I haven't seen anything formal.
Okay. All right. Those were my questions.
Are we all set for capital?
Yeah.
Just I can't see Derek or Mike, so if you have any questions, pop in.
No additional questions, Lisa. Thank you. Thanks, Amy.
You're welcome. Pop up. So on the capital, if you all just want to go through any questions that you have, I won't go through every project individually.
Yeah, please don't.
Linda, this is fun. It's fun working through all these.
I have two, but I'll
Here
open it up to
forever.
board members first. Is there anyone who has questions on the capital budget? Okay, I'll start while you guys are looking. Amy, can you just give us an update on the fiscal year 10 Woodland Street upgrade, sort of why it's taking 10 years to complete that, and the fiscal year 13 town security measures, just sort of a narrative as sort of why it's the length of the projects there.
So I can give you what I've found since I've been here. So originally where it says this project 2010 Woodland Street upgrade, initially the project just said project 2010. So as I was going through looking at over the years, I think maybe it was like last year where Toner and I got together and I had the same question you did, like, what is this money? Why isn't it being closed out? So they were just using it for various projects as they needed it. I don't think there was any specific project. And there was a couple of them like that. This fiscal year 16 money was very similar. I don't think the 2018. So anyways, Tony and I met and we sat down and I'm like, well, what projects do you have open that you're charging to this money? And can we give this project an actual name and get it spent down? So as you can see with these two for fiscal year 10 and fiscal year 16, that's exactly what he's doing. He's using it for the Woodland Street upgrade and he is getting that money spent down so that we can close out.
So these are approved as part of the capital budget. I'm pretty sure we didn't approve just to use it for anything.
Right. All right.
So that's, I mean, we may not be able to figure out because 2010 is even, I mean, it was barely on the board at that point. So there may be no one who can explain where we are, but going forward, is there a plan to sort of use that up in the next, how many years?
For the fiscal year 10 and fiscal year 16?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to be done this year. So you can see the fiscal year 16, he's already spent it. So there's a zero balance. And then he has a very small balance where the expected completion date is June 2022. So there is a plan to clean up those projects.
Yeah. I don't know if there was a slush fund, but that's water over the dam.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. That was well before my time.
It was many years, a decade
well before
ago.
all of us. Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you for that. Are there any other questions on capital at this point?
I have a quick question, Lisa, just on the senior center, community center. What does it mean that we need a state audit? Does it mean that we're holding off on any additional spending until we get a state audit, or once the full allocation has been spent, then we need a state audit? Has there been any money spent this year on the community center design? Where does that stand?
So the senior community center design, no, I don't think that there's been anything spent. When it says needs state audit, typically that means that there is state grant funding associated with it. So when the project is complete, it goes to the state and they get to do their own audit of the work that we've done, and they get to review all of our expenditure detail. They get to review the project and they have the final sign off. And it's only until they give us the final sign off that they will give us the last payment in the grant funding. Unfortunately, the state is years behind in their audits, both on the town side and also on the school side. Right now, there's some towns that are floating $3 million because of the state grant reimbursement. And I believe that there was some legislation, I could be speaking off the cuff, but I know this did come up recently where they actually changed their retainage amount to a lower amount because they are so backlogged. But I can follow up on that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess, are we on hold for spending any additional money on that right now then?
Yeah, the project is done. There's no
Oh, okay.
that has to be spent. We're just waiting for our revenue from the state from the grant.
Okay.
Derek,
Thank you.
we're gonna see a few audits in the coming year, especially with the ARPA. There's a mandatory federal audit there that we're gonna see at some point too. So more to
Well,
come.
that's kind of interesting because I thought it was a little bit, I'm not going to use the term, but free for all on ARPA. What would the audit include? Just that the money was spent?
I think it depends on what bucket, if you will, you're using the money on. So if you are using it for, say, PP&E or their nonprofit program or things like that, they're going to audit to make sure that you stayed within the guidelines of the program. Fortunately for us, we were able to utilize the revenue loss, and they're probably just going to make sure that we spent it within general government services. Our audit should be super quick, and there really shouldn't be much to it. But for the larger towns that could not take a revenue loss allocation or had sufficient funding above and beyond the revenue loss allocation, they will be doing very detailed audits to make sure that all of the compliance documents were adhered to.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, I'm other than that, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, or should we go on to Board of Ed?
Just one thing. Have we done capital reserves yet, Amy?
Nope.
Can you just go to that? I know one of the things we had did in April was assign $150,000 for the assessor study. And where does that show up in our assignments?
So it doesn't, since this is for fiscal year 22, and I only did the balance as of fiscal year 22. But if you like, we can update this to add fiscal year 23 as well. And then just do another allocation showing the balance for the currently approved budget.
Okay, that would be great. And where would it show on this sheet once you do that? Where?
I could probably add something down here. So this gives the fiscal year 22 balance with the allocation, and then any fiscal year 23 challenge changes or updates, and then do another breakdown.
Okay, just so we can keep track of
what you've approved.
Exactly.
And since you mentioned it, and this might not be the right time to respond, but are we going to get an update on where things stand with hiring somebody in the assessor's office and contracting for additional?
It's on my finance director's report.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Okay. And Amy, sorry.
Go ahead.
Just a quick one on this fiscal year 2022 supplemental appropriations. I think you put those on your finance director report as well. Yes. Can we add that to this summary somewhere in there, like maybe in the fiscal notes section?
Wait, can you say that again? The supplemental appropriations, add those where?
Either a fiscal note, 14, what they are, because I just forget them.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Amy? Does anyone have any feedback for Amy or me on the new format? Did you find the fiscal notes helpful? Is there anything else people would like to see? I'm going to take that as things are good. Okay. All right, Amy, I think we're ready to move on to the Board of Ed Quarterly.
Okay. So if you're in the new packet, you're going to go to page 53. If you are in the old packet, you are going to go to page 78. What's that? Okay.
Yep.
So here I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. If you look at the expenditures box and you look down where it says total public budget, and you'll see the budget amount of the 73 million, the year-to-date of 51 million, the 21 year-to-date of 51 million. And then right next to that, you'll see the 20 fiscal year 22% spent to date of 70.08%. And then in fiscal year 21% spent to date, it's 70.94%. So one of the things that I had a moment of, that looks really weird. Like, we're in a deficit position this year. Why is that not screaming that we are in a deficit position? And then it dawned on me that we had an even larger deficit last year because of COVID of well over $1 million, which luckily we were able to cover via the grants. But that's why it's not screaming deficit when you're looking at this financial report. So it is saying that there's less of a deficit than last year, which there is. But I just wanted to point that out as to, why isn't this, telling us that there's a deficit? Just because there was a deficit last year and there's actually less of a deficit this year.
Amy, could we add a column that says year-end projections like we do on the town? Because that would take care of that.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. So this is something that was reviewed at the last Board of Education meeting. We are anticipated to have a deficit of about $500,000 to $600,000 at fiscal year end close. So there are three major reasons for that. One is they had to hire 3 teachers at the beginning of the fiscal year due to enrollment issues. That's something that was talked about during tri-board. They also had a lot of increase in their special education costs. There are a ton more outplacements, student evaluations, social emotional services and supports. I was talking with the special education director probably a couple of weeks ago now, and she was giving me some statistics on the beginning of the school year. So you'll see, like, September to March, they had 20 evaluations for services and service requests. From March up until a couple of weeks ago, they had another 20. So things are still ramping up for them. It kind of surprised me. I kind of thought, a child started a year with an education plan. Maybe there were some changes partway through the year, but by March, I would have thought everybody's plan would have been in place and they just would have been moving along with it. Apparently, that's not how this works. They're still in either negotiations or settlements with parents and their attorneys, or placements, or perhaps they're on hold with a placement facility and then they're able to get in later on in the year. So there's still some ongoing special ed movement that we can't predict yet. So we're monitoring that to see if there's going to be any other significant changes. And then the last area is our transportation. So you have all, I'm sure, heard about like the staff shortages. There's been a lot of driver shortages, and we're no exception. So Salters, who is our current bus company, they would typically take care of our regular transportation, some of our special education transportation, and our athletics transportation. Right now, just talking to the owner of Salters the other day, we're lucky that they're able to take care of our regular transportation. So our special ed transportation and our athletics transportation, unfortunately, we had to outsource to alternative vendors. And those alternative vendors are significantly more expensive. And unfortunately, some of those vendors have taken advantage of the situation, knowing that these kids need to get from point A to point B, and there is a shortage. Some have been great about working with us and trying to combine routes, looking at different kids that perhaps are going through Granby and combining different school districts and cutting us a break on that. And then there's been some that, in my opinion, have fully taken advantage of the position that everybody is in. So unfortunately, that has led to some increased transportation costs, mainly on the special education side and the athletics. So we did implement a spending freeze. We're hoping to get about $100,000 out of that spending freeze. So if our anticipated loss is about $500,000, hopefully we have about $100,000 in the spending freeze that we're saving. And then we have our non-lapsing to cover the other $400,000. A more recent development that came out during the fiscal year 23 budget, after we had passed the budget, and I do not know the specifics. I apologize if I forgot to look them up, but there was a settlement on the state level related to related to the open choice grant. And due to part of that settlement, all districts will be getting additional funding for our open choice children. So our open choice kids, that gives us an extra $370,000 for fiscal year 23. So the plan as of right now is to use that $400,000 in non-lapsing to cover the year-end deficit, and then take that $370,000, offset the Board of Education's operating fund, and then take that operating fund savings and put it back into non-lapsing to cover the budgetary plan that we spoke about during the budget process of utilizing that non-lapsing fund to fund the CLIF. There could be a slight use of the non-lapsing fund, anywhere from about maybe $30,000 or so, maybe $100,000. But if it's $30,000, that's hardly anything. We can work with that. If it's $100,000, we were utilizing that non-lapsing fund over the next 2 to 3 years, so it gives us time to plan and reassess and retirements. So there's no issue with having to utilize the non-lapsing fund. So that is the plan of attack as of right now that's been proposed to the Board of Education. And they actually approved the use of the non-lapsing fund at their last meeting. So you all will be getting that on your next agenda in June. So in accordance with their non-lapsing fund policy, the Board of Education has to approve the use of it, and so does the Board of Finance. So you'll be seeing that on your June agenda. Any questions on the Board of Education?
Yeah, Amy, I have a question about busing in general. I've heard things in Cheshire where buses have to go back around and kids are getting picked up later to get to school for a second round kind of busing. I'm more curious about what the strategy or I'll call it long term, meaning like beyond this year, in talking with Mark or whomever at Salter, what the plan is and how long we might be able to rely on, the minimum that we need.
I'm not sure I entirely understand your question, but what's the long-term plan for getting the business built back up so that they can take care of the special education and the athletics?
I didn't know if you had a more broad conversation about the town of Simsbury.
We lost you there, Derek.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess I was just curious as to, maybe some longer term plans, and if Salter's given us any, indication that, what kind of the going concern is for Salters and whether we can rely on them for the next few years, for example.
So he has not shared that information specifically, but we are under contract with them for, I believe, the next 3 to 5 years, and then we'll have to go out to bid again. As of right now, even when they have the driver shortages, the owners are actually driving the buses as well. So they have been able to maintain as of right now. But as far as long term, I could certainly ask him, but he did not divulge that information.
No, I seem to just forget how long we were under contract with them for. I would assume that they do their best to fulfill that contract, but just given everything that I've heard from other towns and just anecdotally from people at work that, it's tough. It's tough finding drivers out there, and really don't know what the answer is. So I'm curious. That's it. Yeah,
we've actually, we did a little bit of, we tried to do a little out of the box thinking during our last conversation. Is there a way for him to act on our behalf as a negotiator because he's in the business? Perhaps getting some leeway with some of the other vendors. So he's going to try to think through some stuff as well. We've talked about and this is completely out there. I haven't talked to anybody about this. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just trying to let you know of some of the things that we're trying to think through. Is it more advantageous for us to advertise for the bus drivers Is there a way to combine services where there's health insurance? I mean, all of this is so much more analysis that goes with it, but in a way to help each other in them keeping our costs down when we do have to use outside vendors, and then offering them in a way to attract, retain drivers. So, I mean, the conversations have started, but there's nothing concrete that we've worked through yet.
Amy,
Okay, I appreciate that.
oops, I'm sorry, Derek, we missed that.
I just said I appreciate it. Thank you.
Amy, for the education quarter, can you also add a summary of the non-lapsing just balance to the sheet?
Yeah.
So we know where that is.
Yep.
Okay. Mike, do you have any comments? I see you there, but just your name.
Yep. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm actually driving. I did review everything last night in preparation of this meeting, and all of my questions so far have been answered or asked by somebody else. So I'm good. Thank you.
Also, kudos to Amy, because I think you, with the fiscal notes, you've anticipated many of our questions. So,
So can I just ask a follow-up question about the buses? And it's just idle curiosity, but
sure.
I mean, and I'm totally sympathetic to the difficulty of hiring these days because you see help wanted signs everywhere. But the contract with them, does it provide for any remedies to us or anything if they are, in essence, in breach of contract because they're not providing the services for which we contracted? Or are they able to do this with impunity?
So no, there is a stipulation that we can renegotiate in the contract if they're not able to provide services. Knock on wood, they have been able to provide for their basic contract.
But not for the special ed and not for the sports. And isn't that part of the contract? So
it's not, it's outside the contract.
Oh, okay. I get it. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I think maybe under normal circumstances, if there were, competitive bids and they weren't, fulfilling, the requirements of the contract, that would be a different thing. But I'm more worried about there even being a replacement at this point.
Yeah.
Art or Bert, do you have anything before we move on to the minutes?
No,
my guess is that, this is a problem you're reading about in a lot of different places.
Yeah.
So, I think we're handling a common problem professionally. So I don't have any wisdom to add to that.
Bert, are you good?
Yeah, if Art can't add any wisdom, I certainly can.
Okay. All right. So, Amy, have we missed anything else you want to share with on the update on the experience study? Where are we with that?
Yep. So on the finance director's report, so there's just 2 items on there. So you had all asked for an update on the assessor position. So that draft job description has been created. It's been forwarded to the town manager's office for review. It is set to go on the agenda of the personnel subcommittee for June 9th and then be approved at the Board of Selectmen meeting on June 13th and then be officially posted on June 14th. So we're hoping with the posting on June 14th, we can let it ride for a couple of weeks, do interviews, and then we should know within the first week or 2 of July if we'll have a candidate. If we do not have a candidate, then we will have to move forward with the additional contracted services with our valuation company.
And just for the public, we've budgeted for that.
Right. So that's the plan.
Is there any way we can move this along more quickly? I mean,
Try.
Can't we work? I mean, I'm frankly shocked that we still haven't even posted the position when we talked about this a couple of months ago.
We could
I know it's the town works differently but this is an urgent situation. And so my only question is, rather than waiting to hear if we've got a good candidate, can we start working on the contract now so that if we don't have a good contract, we jump right in with a contract?
I think the contract would actually be pretty easy because we're already under contract with them. So it's just an additional scope of services. So I'm sure Francine, and I'll confirm, but I'm sure Francine's already talked about them or talk to them about the possibility of the additional services as her backup, because nobody is more anxious than Francine. As soon as she got the draft, she's like, can we have a special meeting? And we would have done a special meeting of the personnel subcommittee, but then we'd still have to wait until the June 13th Board of Selectmen meeting. But yes, Francine is pushing very hard.
Okay. You go, Francine.
She's all over it, trust me.
And could you talk to Francine about her kind offer to give us a tutorial over the summer?
Sure.
Let's get that on the books.
Yes, I'll send her a reminder to do that. And then on the pension fund experience study, we have a pension census for all of the plans that needs to go to Milliman prior to them conducting any work. All of the base information on each employee has been completed within the census. But as of recently, and I'm sure you heard last week during your executive session with Maria, that the contract negotiations have been finalized for our 3 CSEA groups, and those have been in negotiations for probably about 3 years now. So they're getting all of the information from those negotiations, which have to be updated within the pension census before Milliman will do any of the work for us. So Eric is putting that together over the next 3 to 4 weeks. He's putting together those calculations, updating that data, and then it will go to Milliman to begin the study.
Do we have an estimate of how long it'll take once they have all the information?
Well, I knew you were going to ask that, so I emailed Jen, but I emailed Jen too late, so I have to follow up with you on that.
Amy's got your number now, Lisa.
I think so. Yeah, we're pretty
Lisa and I have been spending a lot of time together.
We're pretty predictable in what we ask. We're not very exciting folks. Right, is there anything else before we go to the minutes?
No, that was it.
Okay, with that, I did earlier today send Amy a few minor sort of grammatical changes. The only substantive one is on page 87, where it lists the date of the public hearing, March 23rd, and it's actually April, I think, 5th. So that just needs to be changed.
Yeah, that was caught on the updated packet, but you're right, it was wrong on the initial packet.
Okay, so are there any changes to the minutes that people would like to?
If you got the spelling and grammar of them, I'm good.
Well, it's possible I missed some, so.
Yeah, I trust you.
Okay. I can send you what I did, and we can always update them later if I didn't catch one that you did. All right, so if there are no changes other than the one substantive one changing, but that's already been changed, Amy said, the date. Yeah. So minor, no material changes to the minutes. They'll stand as presented with a few grammatical changes. All right, and I think that gets us to adjournment. So would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how Derek is on here twice, but
I made it.
Oh,
I made it in
goes.
person. I just wanted to, show my face for the last meeting.
oh, okay. I thought maybe you
Reflection
had-
of his status and
you
respect
had
for things.
a mutant. Who
Exactly, Art. Exactly. I normally wouldn't show up in a T-shirt, but I wanted to let you know that I was here. So I just want to say I'm going to pull Lisa. Amy, great job today and throughout the whole budget process and keeping us straight. So really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And while we're giving thanks, again, thanks to Marion as well. So.
Of course. Absolutely.
So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn from someone.
So move to adjourn. Oh,
Well, we'll go with Bert. And
Yeah.
Linda, would you like to second that? Okay.
Sure.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you,
Aye.
Amy, for everything.
Thank
Much
you.
appreciated.